Okay, today's daf, we're going to learn daf Tzadivav, Shabbat daf Tzadivav. Today's daf is sponsored by Audrey and Jake Levant in honor of Audrey's mother, Jerry Goldstein, who made Aliyah 10 years ago today. So mazal tov on that. We're going to start, we finished yesterday, and I made a chart of it, about the 5 different sizes that Rava talked about when we're talking about a kli cheres. Okay, an earthenware vessel, there's 5 sizes that are relevant. Most of them for purposes of purity and impurity, or really all of them for purity and impurity, but from different perspectives. So let's just review quickly. If you look at the sheet, you can see better, and we'll start reviewing from there. It's all about if you get a hole in a kli, how big the hole has to be for it to change the status of the kli as it relates to purity and impurity. So we have kimotzi mashke, if just a little bit of liquid drips out. That's going to basically say that if you have an earthenware vessel that was already a shard, but you use the shard to maybe catch some liquid that was dripping from somewhere else, and that gets a hole where some of the liquid will seep out, that hole is basically going to render this utensil useless at this point. The shard is now useless because it's a broken shard, basically. And we'll see today in the Gemara, they're going to say, nobody would bring a gistra for a gistra, right? Once you're already using this to catch liquid, and now the liquid's going to seep out of that, you're going to take another utensil and put it underneath to catch more liquid. That doesn't make any sense. Anyone would do that. And therefore, it's basically useless, right? Again, you have to remember, when it comes to purity and impurity, I'll keep repeating this, so I know sometimes these concepts are hard to understand. If the utensil has significance and can be used for something, then we render it significant. If it's significant, then it's susceptible to impurity. Once something's no longer significant, then it loses. When it comes to earthenware, we say shviratan, if it breaks. This is taharatan, this makes it pure. So once it's useless, it's not going to have any importance, and it's not going to be susceptible to impurity. And if it was impure to begin with, it's going to lose its impurity. It's going to actually become pure. Of course, you're going to end up throwing it in the garbage, so it's not necessarily so relevant, but theoretically, it loses its status of impurity. The next is kekones mashke. If, when you would submerge it in water, liquid would be able to come through the hole. Then we're going to say, for mechatat, for the para aduma waters, you can't use this anymore to hold the para aduma waters. Or if it was, you can also view it like this, if it was a utensil that was used for the mechatat, then already, since that's what its use, its designated use is, and you can't use it for its designated use anymore, it's going to be considered pure at this point. But if, let's say, you had seeds in there and you have planted those seeds and you have what we call, and that was our Mishnah, the atzitz nakuv, planter with a hole in the bottom or a hole even in the side, then, and you have stuff in there, we're not going to view that as attached to the ground, which means that it is susceptible to impurity, those seeds that are inside. Because if something's attached to the ground, remember, when you have stuff growing in the ground, anything impure touches it, it doesn't affect it in any way. Only once it's detached from the ground, when it gets in contact with a liquid, then it can become susceptible to impurity. So here we're going to view this as detached from the ground for those laws. Next is, once you have an ikev kishoresh katan, a root can get through there, a small root, then already, according to Rava, and we'll see there's a debate about this, it's already considered, it's the seeds that are inside are considered attached to the ground because the roots can get through. And therefore, they'll be attached and they won't be susceptible to impurity. But it's still considered a utensil because you can still put other things in there and use them as a utensil. So if you were using it as a fruit bowl, it would still be functional. And therefore, it would retain its status of impurity, or it would be susceptible to impurity if it were used for fruits. Once you have a whole kimotzi zeitim that olives will fall through, then your standard fruit bowl is no longer going to be usable, and therefore it won't be considered tameh anymore. However, if it's still kimotzi, if it's, let's say, a bowl that you use for pomegranates, then the bowl will still be pure, impure. It'll still have its status because even though it has a big hole, still you can use it for pomegranates. And then nikev kimotzi rimonim, then already it's tahor miklum. And then we ended with this issue about the only thing that if you have a hole, if you have a tzamid patil, right? There's really one more shiur, which is if it's sealed and it's in the house with a dead body. Generally, we say tumah doesn't get in there. What if it has a big hole the size of a rimon, and I'm not going to get into the back and forth in the Gemara, but according to the Gemara's conclusion, depending on the size of the kli, if it's a small, actually I didn't get into this in Machloka Rashi Tosfot about how this breaks up. Each says the opposite, but let's stick with one, which is if it's a big kli, I started with the small, if it's a small utensil and it has a hole the size of a pomegranate can get through, then already we're going to say Tumah can go in through that. And it will become impure in the house, the items that are inside, if there's a dead body. If it's a large kli, then you have to wait until the majority of it is broken for us to say that the tumah can go through. Okay, we're going to finish up these topics then, and then we're going to move on to the next parak. Amar Avasi, Shonim, we're now starting at the top of Tzadiva. Shonim kli cheres, shiuro bekones mashke. Okay, a kli cheres, the main shiur is kones mashke. Below amru motzi mashke. In other words, once it's kones mashke already, it's going to be problem, right? It's going to already have a big hole. That's considered a big hole. Below amru motzi mashke, the only issue of if something seeps out but can't come in is only relevant linyan gistra bilvad, and this is what we said before. My taima amar marzut chaberei de Rav Nachman lefi she'ein omrim havei gistra legistra, because nobody will say let's bring a shard to protect the stuff that's coming out of the other shard. They'll just throw out the shard and bring a new one. Again, once you throw something out, you're rendering it useless, which means it's no longer susceptible to impurity. Amar Ula, pliga bat trei amorai. There's a machloka between two amoraim b'ma'arava in Israel, Rabbi Yossi bar Avin and Rabbi Yossi bar Zavta. If you remember, Ula was one of the people who brought the Torah of Israel to Babylonia. He went back and forth, and so he's telling us in Bavel that, oh, by the way, there's two amoraim who disagree in Eretz Yisrael about the following. Chad amar kimotzi rimon, what are they referring to? What they're referring to is back to the topic of our Mishnah. If you have a planter with a hole, what's the size of the hole that makes this planter considered attached to the ground? Again, once they're attached to the ground, what do we say? That's to tell us that if water gets on them or some of the liquids and then someone touches it who's impure or somehow impurity gets on it, then what's going to happen? Then if it's viewed as attached to the ground, then it's not going to be susceptible to impurity. Only if it's viewed as detached. So at what point is it considered attached to the ground? One says, kimotzi rimon, only if it has a huge hole to basically a pomegranate will go through. And one says, keshoresh katan, like a small root. B'simaneh, how do you remember? Echad amarbev, echad amamit. If you look at those two things on the list of Rava, one is number 3 and one is number 5. Right? They're disagreeing with a big gap. It's not like one says there's kishoresh katan, then there's the olives, and then there's the pomegranates. So you would think that when you have a disagreement, often they disagree about two things that are close. One might say that number 3 and the other one will say number 4 and number 5. But here they're disagreeing with a wider gap. So the way you remember that is one says a very large amount and one says a very small amount. They're saying they're more extreme each opinion, and that's how you remember we don't know who says what, but that's how you remember what the two opinions are. Amar Rav Chanina bar Kahana mishmei Rabbi Eliezer. Kli cheretz shiuro kimotzi zeitin. Okay, he says a kli cheretz, the main shiur is olives, the size of olives. Umar kashisha b'rei Rava mesayim ba mishmei Rabbi Eliezer. He said also in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, v'harei hen kechlei galalim uchlei avanim uchlei adama she'em makablim tuma lo medivrei Torah v'lo medivrei sofrim. Says these are like other vessels that can never be susceptible to impurity. If you have something made of rock or stone, or you have something made of dung of an animal, or you have something made of the dirt from the ground, all those things are not susceptible to impurity, not by Torah law, not by rabbinic law. And basically, as soon as you have a kli that has a hole the size of an olive, you're done. There's no susceptibility to impurity. It's just like those kli. Now, who's he disagreeing with? He's disagreeing with Rava, because Rava said it really depended on whether you're going to use it. If it's something that you use generally for pomegranates, it will still have impurity. And this opinion says no, it doesn't matter what you're using it for. Motzi zeitim already means this is not a kli. It could be you might want to use it, but that doesn't matter. We're going by the average. The average is motzi zeitim, right? Pomegranates are the exception, and therefore we're going to go by the average. So he disagrees about that. However, he agrees with Rava about the following. When we're talking about, right, the samid patil, which protects it, what's the size hole? The hole size is the majority. Once it's in the majority, then the tumah is going to come in. Any less than that, no. This somewhat agrees with Rava. Remember, Rava said it depended on the size of the kli. He doesn't seem to distinguish. Hadran alacha matzniya. And with that, we finish our parak. There was something a little strange I didn't address in this parak, which is how did we get from, and the reason I want to bring it up now is because the next parak is going to go into Hazorek, Mirishut Yachid L'Rishut Rabim, which means that we're back to, right, we thought we were getting off the topic of carrying, but in fact, we're back there. So how did we get off topic and start talking about Notel Tzipor Navzeh Bezeh, and Atolesh Me'atzitz Nakuv, and all sorts of other things, and the makeup? How did we get off topic? Not so clear. It seems to me that we got off topic because we were talking about carrying in a strange manner. Remember, kila achar yad, on the back of your hand or on your foot, and strange ways of doing things. From there, they got to picking off your nails, which was done, we talked about doing it in a normal way and in an atypical manner. And then from there, we got to the makeup, which again, maybe is a way of doing those melachot in a different kind of way. Like, let's say, dyeing. You don't normally dye by putting eyeshadow on, but it is still some type of method of coloring. So maybe that's how we got to those. It's not 100% clear how we got off. I think that's how we got off. The question is not everything exactly fits into that and how we get off to the other topics. But anyway, I'll leave it out as an open question. Starting with the new parak. Hazorek Mirishut Yachid, we're back to our domains. Our private domain, public domain. And if you remember, we talked about Makom P'tor. I'll just remind you what that is. A Makom P'tor is something that's less than 4 by 4 tefachim wide, and either 3 tefachim off the ground up until less than 10 tefachim off the ground. Okay, if it's front, right, something like that, it's going to be called a makom p'tor. Or if you remember, we talked about the airspace of the public domain above 10 tefachim because it's not space that people generally use. People put items on the floor, close to the floor. Once it's 10 tefachim above, people don't generally put things there. So therefore, airspace above 10 tefachim in the public domain is already considered a makom p'tor, and to move something from a public or from a private to a makom p'tor is actually allowed entirely. It's not even forbidden by the rabbis. So that's just background for today. Hazorek merishut hayachid l'rishut harabim, merishut harabim l'rishut hayachid chayav, in both directions. Okay, this is what we're going to call hotza'ah. That's what we keep talking about. I want to carry something out. That's what we've been using the terminology from the beginning. And then there's also hachnasa, which is bringing it inside. We also mentioned that in various cases. So that's bringing it from public to private. Chayav, you're going to be obligated. We know that already. But here, the chidush is, what's unique about this Mishnah? It's not just, until now we've been talking about carrying. I'm walking out with my jewelry on, right? And I'm basically carrying my jewelry from my private to my public, or vice versa. But here they're saying if I throw it, I'm also obligated. It's the same, okay? Throwing is also a problem. Now they talk about a different case. What if I'm passing from my house to your house? I throw it across the street, and there's a public domain in between. There's a machloket, are we obligated or exempt? Ketzad. Now it's unclear what this ketzad is, and later the Gemara is going to undo what I say, but right now I'm going to go with Rashi. Rashi says what we're talking about is the rabbis who exempted. In which case did they exempt? In which case will they actually say you are obligated? And he's now going to set up that there's 2 ways that you can pass from private to private through public. One is going to be forbidden, one is going to be only rabbinic in nature. So, ketzad, shtei gezuz traot zo keneged zo. You have a porch and I have a porch, okay? And one is on my side of the street and one is on your side of the street, okay? Rishut harabim is in the middle. Hamoshit v'hazorek mizo lezo patur. If I pass it to you, okay, we're going to learn that lahoshit, passing from one to the other is also a malacha. Now you might say, how could that be? Isn't it, we learned in the beginning of the Masechet, right, that if I pass, one person gives to another person, that's what we call shnayim sha'aseuah, 2 people doing one malacha, and right, one did the akira, one did the hanacha. But there's going to be a certain way that we're going to learn. If I pass to you or you pass to me, we're going to view that as problematic, okay? So if I pass from Rishut Yachid to Rishut Yachid with Rishut Harabim ba'emtza, it's in certain ways, it's going to be a problem. And we're going to learn it directly from what they did in the Mishkan. So hamoshit v'hazorek mizo lezo patur. So if I throw or I pass from my porch to your porch, My porch is my individual private domain. Yours is yours. And there's Reshut Rabim, the street is in the middle. We're exempt according to the rabbis. But if we're both on the same side of the street, however, there's a space that's a Reshut Rabim in between the spaces, okay, in between my house and your house, we're on the same side of the road. However, there's a part of Reshut Rabim that goes in between our houses. Then, Hamoshit Chayav Azorek Patur. If I pass, I'll be obligated, but if I throw, I'll be exempt. Why? Shekain Hayta Avodat HaLeviim. Shtei Agalot Zo Achar Zo Bereshut HaRabim. Moshitin HaKrashim Mizo Lezo. Aval Lo Zorkim. All this is learned out, and we made reference to this before, from the wagons that the Leviim carried the beams on in the building of the Mishkan, or in the transport of the Mishkan. So they would carry in these wagons. Now, what would they do? They would move beams from one wagon to the other. But it seems, if I understand correctly, they had kind of rows of wagons, let's say a row here and a row there on the other side of the road. And what would they move? They would move from wagon to wagon within the same row. So that's like two houses on the same side of the street with a Reshut Rabim Ba'emtza in the middle. But they wouldn't move from one wagon all the way to the other side of the road. They wouldn't do. So therefore, we're only, again, we get into very minute details. It's very interesting. You would say maybe the concept of passing from private to private through public, we learn from them, and then we take it to any scenario. Come the rabbis and they say, no, we don't take it to any scenario. It depends. It has to be similar to the way they did it in the Mishkan. And not only that, but we learn also throwing. They certainly didn't throw the beams. The beams had sanctity to them. They were used in the Mishkan. So because they didn't throw, therefore we learn that throwing from private to private is not going to be a problem, okay? So now that comes to explain the rabbis who said, potrim, why are we poter? Someone who throws from Reshut Yachid to Reshut Yachid, because it's not the way they did it in the Mishkan, right? Whether two sides of the road or one side, right? Or even within the same side. Now the Gemara starts with a question. It's going to be a bit of a difficult question. It's going to be a little hard to understand what the Gemara's question is, but I'll tell you the problems with the question after I read the question. Question goes like this. Michtei Zrika, we're now starting Tzadi Vav Amud Bet. Michtei Zrika tolada da hotza'ahi. Hotza'a gufa hechaktiva. The whole Mishnah assumes, right, throwing is a question. When are we obligated for throwing? But it assumes that if you actually walk out to the public domain from your private house carrying something, you're obligated for sure. It's only throwing that we start having a debate. Which case is it, from private to private through public? But if I carry it through the public domain, then obviously I'll be obligated. Where do we have that written in the Torah? Now, why is this a strange question? Because in general, we talked about all the melachot are not written in the Torah. Remember? We learned them all out from acts they did in the Mishkan. So why all of a sudden are they looking for a verse for this? They don't say, where's there a verse for plowing in the Torah? Where's there a verse for planting in the Torah? They don't do that. So why are they asking about this? So Tosfot gives one explanation. Tosfot says, and we talked about this in the beginning of the Masechet, that Tosfot calls this malacha gru'ah. It's not really a creative act. Moving something from one domain to another is not your typical creative act like planting or plowing or any of those. So because of that, the rabbis view this in a different manner. They said maybe this one actually needs proof from the text. Otherwise, we wouldn't really know that it's forbidden. And maybe that's what they're looking for. Another problem with this question is there's actually a different source for hotzah somewhere else, which makes this question even more problematic. But in any case, I'll put the question out there. There's different ways of understanding it, but let's just assume we're really looking for the source for hotzah, and we want to find it because we think that without a pasuk, you wouldn't have really thought that it would be forbidden. So they say, so where is hotzah written? Amar Rabbi Yochanan da Amar Kra. And they bring a very strange proof text. Vayitzav Moshe vayaviru kol b'machaneh. This is in Shemot Lamivav, and I'll read you this pasuk and the pasuk after. So Moshe commands the people, and he sends out a voice into the machaneh, into the camp of where the people were, lemor, to say, Ish v'isha al yasu od melacha l'tchumat hakodesh. Don't do any more work. For what kind of work? Dedicating things to the mikdash. Truma. Truma is a donation, a dedication. For bringing what, if you remember, the people all brought their gold and their silver. They brought to to building the Mishkan. So he says, don't bring anymore. And they stop bringing. And then it says in the next verse, They had enough. Okay, they had enough. Now it's a strange word. Hamilacha, the milacha. If you notice, the milacha also appeared. He said to them, don't do more milacha to bring items to the mikdash. That's obviously going to be where we learn that what, and this answer is really, if you read Tosfot, you might think it's a milacha gru'ah, but the Torah calls it a milacha. What's the milacha that they were doing? They were bringing items to the Mishkan. What do you do when you bring items to the Mishkan? You carry them. So from here you see that, okay, they stopped bringing. Why? Now it seems from here why they stopped bringing, because Moshe said, we don't need any more. We have enough stuff, right? I'm thinking of people who look for, to raise money. They never say, oh, we have enough money, we can stop now, right? But Moshe basically says, we've got enough, we're good. So, and then it even says, la'asot ota v'hotar. There was even extra left over. Okay, this is a good tip for fundraising, right? Always make sure you have extra because you might need it later on. Something like Corona might come up and you'll need some, go into your savings. So here it comes. So the Gemara says, we're going to learn it from this pasuk. Moshe Hechan, now how are we going to learn it from this pasuk? Well, Moshe Hechan Havayativ, where was he sitting? B'machane Leviyah, he was in the Levites' camp. If you remember, there were different camps. There was the Machane Shechina, the Leviyah, and the Yisrael. So he was in the Levites' camp. U'machane Leviyah Rishut Rabim Havai. He was in a public space sitting there. He wasn't in his own private house when he told them. V'ka'amar lehu Yisrael, and what did he tell them? Lo tafiku v'tetu mirishut harabim ditchu l'rishut harabim. Don't go take out and bring to me from your private domain to my public space. Okay, and the assumption is, now again, the assumption of the pasuk is, don't bring it to me because I don't need anything anymore. But the drasha is, don't bring me because it's Shabbat. Okay, and it's asur to bring items to me on Shabbat. So the Gemara obviously asked the question which you're thinking, which is, Mimai de Shabbat kai. Who's to say Moshe was talking on Shabbat? Dilma b'chol kai. Maybe it was a regular day. Umishum dishlim alei malacha. And maybe it's just that, as we said, maybe he was just telling them, I don't need any more items. Don't bring me anything anymore. Who's to say it was Shabbat? And he was telling them, don't bring it to me because it's forbidden to carry on Shabbat. So the Gemara answers, well, we learn it from what we call Gzerah Shavah. Gzerah Shavah is when we have two words. One appears in one place, one appears in the other. We assume that what's true for one is true for the other. So, Gamar ha'avara miyom kippurim. If you notice, there was a strange wording in the beginning of that verse. Moshe commanded them. Now, that would have been enough. But then it says, Vayaviru kol b'machaneh. They passed around the sound, meaning Moshe's words, in the camp. So they take that word, Vayaviru, which is a strange use, and they say, oh, that must be here to learn from somewhere else. What else? So it says, Vayaviru. K'tiv hacha ve'yaviru kol b'machaneh, that's our verse. U'k'tiv hatam, and it says, and when it talks about the Jubilee year, Yovel, it says, V'havarta shofar tru'ah. And when do you do that? You're supposed to blow in the Jubilee year, you're supposed to blow the shofar on Yom Kippurim. Now, Yom Kippur, malahalam b'yom asur. Well, when it says ve'yaviru, there, it's on a day that's forbidden to do malacha. Afkam b'yom asur, here it also must have been on Shabbat. Okay, they make this assumption. Must have been on Shabbat. And again, this is taking the pasuk away from the simple understanding and that it meant you can't carry on Shabbat. So the Gemara says, okay, I got you. Eshkechan hotza'ah. So now you've given me a source for carrying things, moving them from private to public. But hachnasa minalan. But as I mentioned earlier, bringing something in from the public to the private is something else. Where do we have a source for that? So the Gemara says, svarahi. Well, that's just a logic. Since already we're saying from one domain to the other is a problem, so mali afuke, mali yule. What's the difference if I'm taking something out or I'm bringing something in? Either which way, it's kind of the same. So miu, but however, hotza'ah av, but hotza'ah is the av melacha, is the main primary category because that's the one it's mentioned in the Torah. Hachnasa tolada, bringing something from private to public is only going to be a subcategory. So now the Gemara asks, and this is a very basic sugya in the differences between avod and toladot, which is a big question always. Umichte ahamachayev ahamachayev amai kari lehai av amai kari lehai tolada. What's really the difference whether we call it primary category or subcategory? If in any case they're all forbidden by Torah law, right? You might think, well, maybe a subcategory is only rabbinic. No, a tolada is forbidden by the rabbis. Is forbidden by the Torah. So why do we call them primary and why do we call them subcategories? What's the point of this terminology? So they say, nafkamina, there's a halachic relevance. What's that? Di avid shte avot bahade adade. If you, let's say, hotza'ah was one and hachnasa was another. And let's say you took something out and then you brought it back into your domain. So if you took something out and you brought it back in, if you called each one an av malacha, what do we learn? You'd have to bring 2 sin offerings because they're each separate avot malachot. Remember, if you do a number of malachot, let's say you forgot it was Shabbat, and you start doing all sorts of things, for each av malacha, you bring your separate korban chatat. Inami, or presumably, shtei toladot bahade adade. Let's say they're called toladot. So if you did 2 toladot, and each is a toladah of a different av malacha, you'd have to bring 2 different sin offerings. The avid, obviously, by the way, if you do it intentionally, you're going to get stoned. It doesn't matter how many malacha you did. It's only relevant if you did it unwittingly and you have to bring a sacrifice. The avid av v'tolada didei lo machayev, but if you do the av of hotza'ah, and hachnasa is a subcategory of that same av, so bringing it in is a subcategory of taking it out, then you're only going to be chayev lo machayev elachada. You're only obligated one. Now they say, Rabbi Eliezer, the machayev v'tolada b'mkom av, but we have this unique approach that there is an opinion that says that you're obligated if you do an av malacha and you do a tolada, a subcategory of that av malacha. Since one is an av and one is a tolada, you are obligated to bring 2 different sin offerings, right? This goes against what we learned earlier, but this is a unique position. According to this position, amai karu le'ava, amai karu le'tolada, it really doesn't matter whether something's a subcategory or a primary category, because either which way, you're going to have to bring a separate sin offering for each one. So in that case, what's the difference whether we call hachnasa an av or we call it a tolada? So they say, well, the difference is it's semantics. Hai dehave b'mishkan chashiva karu le'av. Hach de lo have b'mishkan chashiva lo kare le'av. Okay, there's 2 different ways to read this. You could either say b'mishkan chashiva or you could say b'mishkan v'chashiva, and there's a big difference. So if we read it without the vav, it means anything that was in the Mishkan is basically important, significant. The fact that they did it in the Mishkan gives it significance, and that's why it's called an av. Anything they didn't do in the Mishkan is then called a tolada, because they didn't do it in the Mishkan, and therefore it has less significance. Again, practically speaking, there's not so much of a difference. It's just an issue of semantics. We call an av anything that they did in the Mishkan, because that gives it significance, or not. If you say b'mishkan v'chashiva, then you need 2 criteria for something to be called an av. Has to have been done in the Mishkan, and it has to be an act that has significance. This goes back to what we said earlier, that maybe you wouldn't have assumed hotza'ah was a significant act because it's not a creative act. And then we're going to start distinguishing in the Mishkan between things that are significant versus things that are not significant. And then you just have to start looking at what they do in the Mishkan. Was this important enough to be considered a malacha or not? So there's a bit of a different approach about when we learn from the Mishkan. Do we learn that anything that was done in the Mishkan that already makes it significant because it was done in the Mishkan? Or do we distinguish a little bit between things that were done in the Mishkan that were significant versus things that weren't so significant? Either which way, they're basically saying, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it would be whatever's called an av is what they did in the Mishkan and was important, or maybe because that it was done in the Mishkan, it's important, versus toladot that weren't done in the Mishkan, or as I said, were done but were not so significant. Inami, or hach dichtiva kare av v'hai delo ktiva kare tolada. Whatever's written in the Torah is called an av, and anything that wasn't written in the Torah is called a tolada. Now, this is a little problematic because, as we said, most of the malachot are not written in the Torah. But you would say maybe in our case, at least, hotza'ah, we found somewhere it's written in the Torah. Again, it's a bit of a stretch, but they find a source in the Torah for it, and that's why it's called an av. And a tolada is anything that there's no reference to it in the Torah. Now they're going to bring a Mishnah, and we're going to deal with this Mishnah. They're quoting now a Mishnah from further on in Masechet Shabbat, on a few dapim. I forget which daf it's on. It's on daf kuf. Okay, we're going to get to it on Sunday. Hazorek arba amot bakotel. Okay, we saw this case actually in the beginning of the Masechet also, but it's in a Mishnah on daf kuf. If you throw something 4 amot, now until now we talked about hotza'ah and hachnasa, bringing from one domain to the other. What about 4 amot in Reshut Rabin? We know, we're going to talk today about where's the source for this, that if you carry something 4 amot in the public domain, then you're going to be obligated also. What if you throw something in the public domain 4 amot? So if I throw 4 amot and it lands on a wall, now how does this land on a wall? Usually it bounces off a wall. We talked about this when we learned it last time. What do we say? Well, it was something sticky. Remember the fig cakes that we talked about the other day? So let's say you take a fig cake and you throw it against the wall and it sticks to the wall. If it sticks to the wall, 10 tfachim high, right, in a height above 10 tfachim. It's like you're throwing something in the air. And what did we say? Anything above 10 tfachim, I told you we get back to this today, is what we call a makom ptur. That's an exempt space. So you're not obligated for doing that. But now we're going to say, lemata me'asarat tfachim kizorek ba'avir. But if it sticks to the wall lower than 10 tfachim, then it's like you put it on the ground, and then you're going to be obligated. Vazorek ba'aretz arba amot chayav. You're going to be obligated for throwing something onto the ground 4 amot distance from you. Zarak arba amot b'reshut harabim minal. And now we want to know, where do we have a source that throwing something 4 amot in reshut harabim you're obligated for? Minal and demachayim. Amar Rabbi Yoshaya, shekain, or okay. Now we're going to have, I'll tell you the structure from here toward close to the bottom of the daf. We're going to have 4 different answers. Okay, even within the third answer, we're going to have some issues with it, and we're going to have to change the third answer. Maybe you could look at it as 5. I thought it was really 4, and that the third one just sort of gets modified a little. Each one we're going to reject till we get to our final 4th answer. So they want to know, where's the source for throwing in reshut harabim? I see someone asked the question about that we've been discussing hotza'ah since the beginning of this Masechet, and why all of a sudden now are we looking for a verse? It's a very good question. And it could be because they were looking for verses of throwing. Because of that, it gets them asking about the verses of passing. It's also one of the questions as to, in the beginning, why I said it's a very strange question, and the answer is also a strange answer. Maybe the question isn't exactly where do we have the source for hotza'ah. Maybe it's a little bit of a more defined question, and maybe the question means something a little different than the simple reading. But that, again, is something for a more in-depth look into. So now, what do we have? We have this, we're looking for a source for where in the Mishkan did they throw items. The people who were weavers, they would throw their needles one to the other. Okay, someone needs a needle. I don't know, I wouldn't recommend doing this, but they would throw their needles one to the other. So Gemara has a very good question here, which is, Julie will be happy with this question. Orgim machatim lamalahu. They don't use needles. Weavers don't use needles, right? That's not an implement. It's people who sew use needles, not weavers. Ella, so they correct this. Okay, answer number 2 is shekain tofrei yiriot zorkim machatehen. Okay, it's the people who sewed, not the people who wove. But then they say, how do you know that they threw it, that they were sitting at a distance of 4 amot? This is great. This is all about social distancing, right? How far apart were they sitting? Is it 2 meters, right? How far apart do you have to be? So Dilma Gabe Hadad, maybe they sat right next to each other and they didn't need to throw it 4 amot. So the answer, no, you can't sit and sew one right next to the other. Why not? It's pretty obvious. I poke you with my needle. What happens? You put your needle in, and then when you pull it out, your arm goes out. You might end up pricking somebody with your needle. So of course they didn't sit so close to each other. So again, this goes back to social distancing. How far did they need to sit to make sure you didn't poke? So they're assuming 4 amot. But then they say, wait a minute. They say, sorry, did I? Dilma gabe hadade, right? Matu hadade machatin. They would poke each other with their needles. So they say, Dilma b'toch arba yatve. It's true they wouldn't sit right next to each other, but they still could have been within 4 amot of each other. 4 amot's enough distance that you're not going to poke your neighbor, and maybe it was less than 4 amot, so that's not a good source. So we had the weavers with their needles, would throw their needles. We said, no. Then we said the sewers with their needles. Now, third answer, Elam Rav Chisda, let's go back to the orgim, the weavers. Shekain orgei yiriot, zorkim buchyar b'yiriyah. What would they do? They'd be weaving their curtains, and they would throw the shuttle through. Remember, the shuttle holds the string with the right, there's the warp that you set up the warp on the loom, and then you throw the shuttle with the weft threads through the loom. So there you have throwing. Maybe that's it. So then they're going to have a few problems with this. Balo ogdo biado, but you still have the string in your hand. okay? It's true you throw it, but you still hold part of the string in your hand. So that's not like throwing because you still have part of it in your hand. So they say, Benischa batra. On the last one, you throw it and you let go because you're done. Okay? So therefore, Julie, maybe you can confirm that you actually do this. And on the last one, you throw it and you're finished. So then they say, even if you say that, there's still an issue. But you're still going through. Now, here's an interesting thing. The space where the curtain is, the curtain itself functions as you're making it as a makom p'tor. Okay, I'm not exactly sure how they view this, but the curtain itself becomes its own space. And theoretically, if you throw something there, you're in a makom p'tor, which you're exempt from. So that can't be it. So now they change this a little, and maybe you really should view this as a whole separate answer. You're sitting weaving, I'm weaving, we have a whole bunch of weavers in a row, and sometimes you don't have a shuttle. I would throw you my shuttle. So we're building the Yeriot for the Mishkan, and I might throw you my shuttle. So this goes back to throwing their needles. Maybe they're throwing the shuttles back and forth. But again, they say, now here the needles aren't sharp, as Julie confirmed, and the needles aren't sharp, and the shuttle isn't sharp. So theoretically, you could throw the shuttle from one to the other, right? So maybe if you throw the shuttle one to the other, and while you're using the shuttle and the implements for weaving, there's nothing sharp there. So therefore, you could theoretically be sitting right next to someone. And then it's not within 4 amma. So the answer, matu adade bechefet. Still, when you're weaving, you need space, and you might knock into someone while you're doing the weaving. So again, they would sit spaced out. And then let's assume the space was 4 amma. So then they say, no, you could say, just if you need your space and I need my space, maybe they're sitting staggered. I'm a little forward, you're a little back, your next one's forward, next one's back. And if we pass our shuttle from one to the other, we could still be within 4 amot, and that wouldn't teach you about throwing an item 4 amot. We're still trying to figure out, did they really throw items 4 amot in building the Mishkan? So that was question number 1. Question number 2 about this, Vitu, Misha'ilim Mehadade. Did they actually borrow shuttles from each other? We actually know that they didn't. Vahatanya, it says on the following Braita, Vahatanya Luda taught the following source. Ish me melachto asher hema osim. Said every person and their job, okay, that they do. And why do they have all these words? Every person and their job that they do. But it would have been enough to say ish mi melachto. Mi melachto oseh ve'eno oseh mi melachet chavero. What did they learn from this? Each person did their own, everybody was specialized, they had their own special job, which means that they had, if you're a specialist, you have your own utensils, you don't use other people's. So therefore, there was no borrowing, people weren't throwing shuttles back and forth one to the other. So that's question number 2 on this answer. And third is, Vitu, even if you say they threw their shuttles one to the other, where are we going to, this will give us a source for throwing, it won't give us a source for passing. So we don't like this answer. Ella, and now they're going to say, we want an answer that covers any kind of movement of 4 amot or shiur rabim that's going to be obligated. Passing, moving, carrying. So what do they answer? A very broad answer. Ella kol arba amot or shiur rabim gemara gemirela. It's all a masoret, and they call this also halacha Moshe Sinai. It was passed down by oral tradition. Doesn't come up in the Torah. We don't know that they did it in the Mishkan, but it was a masoret. Okay, and with that they end. That's their answer. Now we're moving on to Parshat Shavua, which is very nice. Always nice when that coincides. The story of the Mikoshesh Eitzim in the desert. There's a story about a person who is gathering wood in the desert. And the question is, what happened? He was gathering wood, the people saw him, and they go to Moshe, what are we supposed to do? And the end of the story is, I'm not going to go through all the details, you'll hear it in Shul this week. The end of the story is that he basically ends up, right, not everyone's going to Shul these days, but whatever, you can read it on your own. He ends up getting stoned for what he did. So that's what happens with him. He gets stoned. The question is, what was his sin? What did he do? Right? Generally, you assume he must have been cutting down trees. But we're going to see now that it wasn't so clear he was cutting down trees and that was his problem. It's going to be a 3-way machloket about what he did. And the first answer is going to be none other than he was carrying. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Mikoshesh ma'avir arba amot b'reshut rabim have. He was carrying the wood 4 amot in the public domain. That's what he was doing wrong. Now, by the way, if you say that, then you give this a very high status of malacha, because that was the one case we see someone actually got the punishment for it in the Torah, is hotzah, which again is a way, I believe, of the rabbis trying to strengthen this malacha, right? We talked about maybe they're talking about it so much because people aren't careful about it. Maybe people don't take it seriously. This is serious. Look, he got stoned for it. And we'll come back to that idea soon. B'manita tan, in a Braita, it says, tolesh hava. Tolesh, which is uprooting it from the ground, right? That's what I said originally. Rav Acha, Rav Yaakov, Omer, ma'amer hava. He put stuff in, he made bundles of the wood. Mikoshesh is really, he was a wood gatherer. When you gather, what do? You put in a pile. That's the malach of ma'amer. L'mayin afkamina, what do we really care what he did? Who cares? We know he did something on Shabbat. He gets skila, the story. And when you're learning the story, you don't necessarily focus on what exactly was, which malacha was it. Of course, if you're learning Masechet Shabbat, that's what you're going to focus on. But they're going to come up with a practical difference. L'chidi Rav, according to Rav, why? D'amar Rav, and this is something we quoted earlier in the Masechet, which is a very interesting source. Matzati Megillat Starim Bei Rabbi Chia. I found a hidden Megillah in the house of Rabbi Chia, v'katuv bei, and it says the following: Isi ben Yehuda Omer, Avot Melachot Arba'im Chaser Echad. Isi ben Yehuda said the 40 Melachot, there are 40 minus 1. Ve'eno chayav el echad, and you're only obligated one. The Gemara says, V'tulo, what could he possibly mean? You're only obligated on one malacha and not anymore. V'hatnan, this famous line we keep repeating. Avot Melachot Arba'im Chaser Echad. Says in the Mishnah, there's 39 Melachot minus 1. There's 40 Melachot minus 1. There's 39. They asked, why did they give you a number? Rabbi Yochanan said, if you do them all in one act of forgetting, right? You didn't know it was Shabbat and you did all these acts, or you didn't know Malachot were forbidden and you did all of them, you're only obligated, right? You're obligated one for each of Malacha. That was what we just discussed earlier today. So how could you say you're only obligated one? Ema, what must he be saying? And this is the fascinating shita. There's one malacha that you're not obligated for. Of all the malacha, right? And it's the secret thing. Nobody knows which one. Now, in the Gefet, which is material that the Rabbanit Michelle Farber do on our site, so they speak this week. It'll be up later this morning. They speak specifically about this issue of the Mikoshesh and what he did. And they talk about this issue of, what do you mean you're only, if he says there's one you're not obligated, would that cause people to be more serious about all the malachot because you don't know which one, or maybe a little less serious because you know that one is not as significant as all the others, right? And what is it? Anyway, there's interesting material there that they talk about all sorts of interesting things. Anyway, let's move on. So Ema eno chayav al echad mehen. So now, why does this have relevance to us? Well, if we know the Mikoshesh got, oh, and by the way, there's a machloket here. When it says you're not chayav for one of them, does it mean, right? You're obviously, they're all forbidden. So it's at least a lo taseh in the Torah. But there's a machloket. Does it mean you just don't get stoned, but you would get karet in the hands of God, and you would have to bring a sin offering? Or does it mean no karet, no sin offering, and only lashes? Okay, that's a machloket here about this one malacha. Obviously, it's not practical. Nobody knows one malacha. Now, by the way, you might say, then we can't ever stone anyone because we don't know. Maybe that's the malacha according to him. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, pshitale demavir chayav, we can at least knock one out of the picture. We know that according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's not havara, that's not the one, because he got stoned for it, for carrying in Rishut Rabim. Umatnita, in the Braita, pshitale de tolesh chayav, it's obvious to him that tolesh, which was zorea, which is kotzer, a toladav kotzer, would be not the one. So for each one, Mar Savar Hamiyat Lo Masako, Mar Savar Hamiyat Lo Masako. According to each one, that's not the doubtful case, okay? We know at least one of them. Now, obviously, it still leaves us in doubt because it's one of the three. So it doesn't really help us. But each one of those people, they wouldn't have a doubt about Isi ben Yehuda. Okay, last interesting thing for today, and this is what we always call the law of diminishing personalities in the Torah. So, Tanu Abanan, Mikoshesh Zet Slofchad. Okay, Tzlofchad was the father of these 5 daughters, who the daughters come forward and they want to get land, right? The first feminist movement in the Torah. They say, Avinu meit b'midbar, our father died in the desert. He didn't die with Korach and those people who tried to say he's not such a bad guy. Ki bechet omet. He died for his own personal sin or his own sin. We're going to have to see what is his sin. Ubanim lo ayulo, and he doesn't have sons, and therefore we want to get the inheritance, the land. So the Gemara says, the Braita says, Mikoshesh, that's lafchad. Why did he die? They try to figure out what chet could possibly have been. Must have been he was the guy who was the wood gatherer. And now they're going to prove it from what we call it zera shava. Usually we use this for halachic reasons. Here we're going to use it for midrash purposes. They were in the desert. Notice Bamidbar appears in both. Now it's not like the word Bamidbar, it doesn't appear a lot in the Torah, but it says he was in the Midbar, he was in the Midbar. Now we have a great line with this will end. Amalo Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, Akiva, ben kachu ben kachatati lidena tadin. Wow. You're going to be in trouble for saying this either which way you look at it. Im kidvarecha Torah, im kidvarecha, if you're right that he really was, HaTorah kisato va'ata megaleoto. The Torah didn't tell us. Obviously, they didn't want to embarrass him or they didn't want to let us know. And you're now revealing something the Torah didn't want to reveal to us? Vim lav, and if you're wrong about this, atamot silaz alotot tzadik. You're making this real tzaddik. Now, it's hard to say it's a tzaddik because it says kibachet omed. But okay, maybe tzaddikim do little sins and maybe it was something small. Tomorrow, we're going to have to see what the rabbis think his sin was, and we'll see. It wasn't actually so small. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera basically says, either you're turning him into a criminal, and he wasn't such a criminal, and how could you say he was the Mikoshesh? With that, we'll end today, and tomorrow we'll pick up on this topic. As I said, what did he do wrong according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, and we'll get more into this story.